It was a gray Tuesday morning when Michael stepped out of his small apartment building. The city streets slick from overnight rain, and the chill in the air made him pull his jacket tighter around his shoulders as he walked toward the corner cafe, where he usually grabbed a coffee for himself and sometimes a pastry for his son. The smell of damp concrete and brewing coffee mingled in the morning air, creating a strange comfort, yet he could not shake the feeling that something unusual awaited him today. Though he could not place what noticed her immediately, a thin figure huddled against the brick wall of the building across the street, wrapped in layers of tattered clothing, and her eyes met his with a cautious, wary look that betrayed a mix of hunger and fear, and instinctively he felt his heart tighten because he knew that look. He had seen it before in the faces of his son's classmates when they were desperate for help, and he hesitated for a fraction of a second, wondering if he should continue on to the cafe or stop and acknowledge the stranger. And the way her gaze followed him made the decision for him. Crossed the street deliberately slow, as if to show there was no threat, and when he reached her he offered a small nod and asked if she wanted something to eat. Her voice was hoarse when she whispered yes, and he felt a pang of sympathy mixed with an odd sense of inevitability, because something about her presence felt familiar, though he could not place why. Yet he was already reaching into his backpack for the sandwich and fruit he had packed for his son, and he handed it to her with a gentle smile, knowing the world was unforgiving to people like her. She accepted it cautiously, her hands trembling slightly as she held the food, and her eyes darted around the street almost as if she expected someone to stop them or accuse them of something. And Michael felt the raw intensity of her vigilance press against his chest in a way that made him acutely aware of how fragile life could be for people on the margins. And as she began to eat, he noticed the faint tremor in her fingers and the way she avoided his gaze, even as she muttered a quiet thank you, leaving him with a question he could not answer about who she was and why she had been standing there in the cold rain. City moved around them, oblivious to the small interaction that had taken place, the sound of tires on wet asphalt and the chatter of passers-by filling the air. Yet in that moment a fragile connection had formed, and Michael felt a strange sense of satisfaction mixed with unease, because helping her seemed both instinctive and dangerous. He did not know what to expect from someone who had been pushed to the edges of society, and when he turned to leave he noticed her watching him from the corner of her eye with a look that was neither pleading nor angry but calculating, and he felt a shiver run down his spine. Weeks passed in the blur of routine. School, lunches, bills, work, and soccer practice, and Michael tried to push the memory of the homeless woman from his mind, though he caught himself scanning the streets, sometimes expecting to see her and wondering what had become of her, and each time he felt the unease return stronger, as if the universe had tied him to that brief encounter in a way he could not understand. Yet he dismissed it, thinking it had been a random act of kindness and nothing more, until the morning arrived when everything changed. It began with a knock at his door, sharp, insistent, and the kind of knock that made him pause in the middle of pouring coffee, because it carried an urgency he could not ignore. And when he opened it he froze, because standing on the threshold were two sharply dressed individuals, their expressions serious, their eyes scanning him with professional calculation, and behind them he thought he glimpsed a figure he recognized immediately, the homeless woman. Her appearance now transformed yet unmistakable, and his stomach twisted in confusion and dread, because he had not expected her to find him again, let alone in such a formal and commanding way. And of the lawyers introduced themselves, calmly stating that they represented the woman he had helped weeks before, and Michael felt the room shift around him as he tried to understand the implications, and before he could respond the woman stepped forward, her eyes meeting his with a steady confidence that was both unsettling and familiar, and she explained in precise, measured tones that she had been involved in a situation that required restitution, and that his assistance had created a ripple effect leading to consequences he could not have foreseen. And Michael felt a cold dread settle over him, because he realized that a simple act of kindness had set into motion events far larger than he had imagined. Had tried to speak, but his words caught in his throat as the lawyers outlined the situation, referencing legal documents and circumstances that were complex and intricate, and Michael felt as if he had been pulled into a world he did not understand and could not control, and yet the woman's gaze held him steady, almost demanding that he listen and understand. And he felt a strange mixture of fear and curiosity because every word she spoke suggested that the simple meal he had offered had led to a chain of events with consequences that were both serious and entirely unexpected, leaving him standing. Frozen with questions, he could not yet formulate. The woman's tone shifted, subtly indicating that she had not come to threaten but to negotiate, and Michael could feel the subtle tension in the room tighten around him as the lawyers outlined the conditions she had set forth, and he struggled to process the notion that an act he had considered trivial had now positioned him at the center of a situation involving money, legal obligations, and decisions that he had no experience navigating. And yet the woman's presence carried an authority that made him realize she had orchestrated her return with precision and purpose, leaving him uncomfortably aware of the precariousness of his situation. Glanced at her, trying to reconcile the frail figure he had seen in the rain with the poised, confident woman standing before him, and he noticed the faint scars along her hands and wrists, subtle reminders of hardship that had not been erased by time or circumstance, and he felt a surge of guilt mixed with awe because he understood that she had transformed her life in some way, yet retained the memory of that small kindness and had chosen to return in a way that forced him to confront both the consequences of his actions and the reality of her survival, leaving him unprepared for what would come next. The lawyers shifted papers across the floor, their expressions meticulous and deliberate, outlining schedules, meetings, potential settlements, and options for resolution, and Michael felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the conversation and the speed at which it had escalated from a moment of charity to a complex negotiation involving multiple parties, and he realized that he had underestimated the agency of the woman he had helped, and that her presence in his doorway was no accident but a carefully calculated step in a larger plan, leaving him reeling and uncertain of the next move. The woman stepped closer, her voice softening yet maintaining a quiet strength. As she recounted details of her situation, the struggles she faced, the decisions she had made, and the obstacles that had brought her to that precise moment, and Michael listened intently, feeling the weight of her words pressing into him, the gravity of her experiences, and the reality that the small act of kindness he had performed had touched a life deeply enough to create ripples that he could neither ignore nor fully understand, and he realized that the simplicity of the meal had been deceiving, masking consequences far beyond his anticipation, leaving him suspended in unease and fascination. Felt compelled to respond, offering tentative words of support and curiosity, asking questions about her circumstances and her unexpected reappearance. Yet every answer she gave only deepened the mystery of her intentions and the implications of her return, and Michael felt the room shrink around him, the air thick, people with anticipation and unspoken tension, as he understood that the woman's presence was not simply a thank you but a call to action, a challenge to confront realities he had never imagined, and the lawyer's steady presence reinforced the certainty that the stakes were high and immediate, leaving him with a sense of urgent, uncertain tithe. Conversation continued in careful, measured exchanges with pauses that carried more meaning than the words themselves, and Michael became acutely aware of the fragility of his position and the unexpected magnitude of his small act of kindness, and he realized that the events of the past weeks had been building toward this moment, an encounter orchestrated with precision and determination, and he felt both fear and awe as he listened to the woman articulate her needs, her strategy, and her expectations, leaving him caught between admiration for her resolve and apprehension at the power she now wielded in his life. At one point she paused, looking him directly in the eye, and Michael felt a chill run through him because there was a depth of understanding in her gaze that suggested she knew more than she revealed, that she had measured his character, his responses, his hesitations, and that the consequences of his actions would continue to unfold in ways he could not yet predict. And The lawyers leaned slightly forward, indicating the seriousness of the moment, and Michael felt the weight of inevitability pressing down on him because he understood that this meeting would change everything, leaving him suspended in anticipation of what would come next. The woman gestured toward the documents, explaining in precise detail how the situation could be resolved, the potential outcomes, the responsibilities he would bear, and the influence